It's saying God love you. So this is but whoever love God, it's known by God. And it's one Corinthians, Thians, 8.
Corinthians.
Yeah, Corinthians 8, 8:3. So you say, everyone want to be accepted. We all want to know the other appreciates us. But the truth in life is that not everyone will. There are going to be people in our life who simply don't like us. Too often, though, we waste a lot of time getting those who don't like us to like us and accept us. And we put too much weight into what the wrong they say. But have you ever considered the words you speak to yourself? Often we can speak badly about ourselves because we have heard those same things from others in our life, from the wrong day. God, though, has something to say that many people may never tell us. His message to us is simple. I love you. God accepts you just the way you are. Don't base your sense of self-worth on what the wrong they tell you. Instead, find acceptance and love from God first, because then you will discover a foundation that life can truly be built on. That's it.
That's good. That's good. Appreciate that, Pia. You know, that is one of the deep things that we struggle with, isn't it? Is that idea of acceptance, and where do we find it, and how do we begin to come to a place of having a proper self-esteem and not be always feeling like we're somehow less than. It's good. Okay, thank you very much, Pia. I appreciate it. Terry, you got anything else for us?
I have a question.
Ask away.
But first of all, Pia, can you share that with us?
Sure.
I like that.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Shanna, I wanted to ask about your back.
Oh, it feels little by little, like tiny bits better. But I don't have my appointment until the 26th, I believe, of this month. So hopefully we can go further with imaging or something from there. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you, Terry.
And then I just wanted to see if any of you have watched The Chosen.
No.
No. Oh my goodness, it is so good. Have you seen it, Pastor John?
You know, we just started it. In fact, we were just saying last night we need to watch some more of it. We watched the first two. Lori, how many of The Chosen we watched? 2 or 3? 2. Just the first 2 so far, but it was really good.
Or what channel is it on, Terry?
It's a video, or you can watch it on the app.
Okay.
But it's about Jesus, and but instead of putting his whole life into a 2-hour movie, they're planning on 8 seasons of this series.
Oh.
And it's really good.
So is it on, where do I find it?
You can download the app in your app, whatever, or you have an iPhone, so the App Store. I bought it on Amazon for our anniversary, but yeah, it's very, very good. Let me see if I can show you what
I don't know if you have Amazon
I do.
Prime, but we have Amazon Prime streaming, and that's where we saw it. The first season is on that.
Okay.
But yeah, very, very good.
As my wife says, just Google it, you'll find it. That's the way it is with Google.
It's on YouTube. Perfect.
Yeah, that's what she said. It's on YouTube also.
Perfect.
But
I wanted to say something. Somebody, after I had done my reading, we were talking about something at work, and somehow the Torah got brought up. And I never knew anything about the Torah prior to this class, I have to say. So yesterday, one of my coworkers and I were talking about it, and my coworker was like, oh, I don't understand anything about the Torah. And I was like, but the Torah is part of the Bible. And she was like, what do you mean the Torah is part of the Bible? And I was like, yeah, it's in Deuteronomy. And then I was like repeating stuff about it and like what the meaning was. And I was like, oh, I understood what I read. I was so impressed with myself. It was so great.
And rightly you should be. That's awesome.
After I read something like 3 times, I'm very impressed with myself and I understand it.
Well, that's not easy. So especially when you got new things like this. So, but way to go. I bet your coworker was impressed as well.
She wasn't impressed at all.
Ah.
I was impressed.
Well, good for you. Good for you.
Thanks.
So yes, so very proud of that. And yes, Terry, I want to echo and say, yeah, The Chosen is really good. And it's I think it's fun and they do a really good job with it. I've been impressed.
Here, I had my husband bring it in, but that's it. If you can see it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So really good. There's 2 discs in this, and we really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I don't want to be a spoiler here. That's Jesus on the cover there. So at least their depiction of him.
Yeah.
As my wife said, he's not as good looking as Jim Caviezel was in The Passion of the Christ. But you know, you got to take what you can get. Maybe, yeah, he might look a little bit more like actually Jesus did look than Jim Caviezel does, but that's okay. Well, we don't have to get into all of that.
You know what? I'm not about the looks or anything, but one thing about that movie is it portrayed Jesus as really an everyday person. The way he was interacting with the guys, you know, like Peter and all of that, like they're joking a little bit, but it just, you know, he just was there with everybody, a people person. Is what I kind of saw. It was kind of neat.
Yeah, no, I think that's the beauty of it so far, is it really does kind of take something that it feels often very, you know, we have a Sunday school image of what it must have been like, but this kind of makes it feel a little more personal, a little more real, maybe.
Yeah.
Something that we could almost imagine in our own minds that, you know, if I was alive then, I could have walked around with Jesus. That would have been kind of cool, and it wouldn't be quite so distant that often that we have it in our heads. It would be a weird thing, but it wasn't, and so that is a good piece of it. Okay, and you know what makes that work, Terry? I'll say this about the show is that they've done a pretty good job of going back and trying to do what in a way kind of what we're trying to do with our Bible interpretation idea, is that they go back in and then they you know, a lot of the interactions they don't know. It's not things that we can know, but they try to put it in a way that would be understandable for us. And so when we look at the Bible and we look at the message, and then we have to understand what it was like in its original, you know, context, what it was like for the cultural expression from the author or the readers. And then we are able to translate that, understand it, and translate it into a modern context that makes sense to us. And that's what we call interpretation. That's doing good exegesis that moves us to a good hermeneutic of how to understand in our present context what the message from a long, long time ago was. And so you'll see that they try really hard to make it culturally appropriate, historically accurate, but at the same time allow the message then to be put in a way that makes sense for our contemporary minds to understand. And so it's good. It's good interpretation, and I think it makes it easier for us to engage a little bit. Okay, well, hey, we want to talk about the prophets. So Don, I'm going to come right back to you in a minute with that question about what was said about Isaiah. But in the Bible, there's a lot of books that we most often don't look at or don't read very much. And that is the section that is called the prophets. It begins with Isaiah, it follows with Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and all the way through to the very last book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi. All of those books fall into the category that we call that we refer to as prophets. Throughout other parts of the Old Testament narrative, for example, you'll see the work and the actions and some of the teachings of the other prophets, prophets like Elijah or Elisha. Some of those will be often referred to not as the writing prophets, but as the action prophets, and they're part of those stories. There's a little bit of crossover, but for the most part, you won't read too many stories about what Isaiah did, but you'll read a lot about what Isaiah saw and how he expressed it in the book of Isaiah. But the prophets, when we think of prophets, often what we think most about is the idea of telling or foretelling the future. And that is part, we'll find that is part of that prophetic message, that there is some future telling, and we see that especially in relation to talking about the coming of Jesus. And Isaiah is a great place. Isaiah is one of the best examples of a lot of what he was speaking of as something that was going to come to be, hundreds of years later when the Messiah has come. But most of the prophets don't deal with future telling at all. Most of the prophets instead were dealing with the present day circumstances that they could see in the world around them. And so most of their work and most of their teaching, and we'll look at some of that tonight, was really dealing with what's going on around them. And for lack of a better word, the call for either the leaders, the power, the king, or the people, the nation, Israel, to repent, turn around, to begin to honor God and to operate in a way that honors God. And that becomes their role. For the most part, they run from, say, the 8th century BC through to about the 5th century BC. That's when the prophets were really going strong. And part of that is because over the course of the centuries, the people kept moving farther and farther away from God's ideal for them. And so the prophets began to be raised up to be those who called the people back to God. And again, we see that in specific in the stories of the prophets when they would go and actually confront a king, say, for example, the way Elijah would confront King Ahab, or famously how a prophet by the name of Nathan once confronted King David. And often we see that it is the prophet's role to call the king, to lead the people in a way that honors God. And kings tended to be people who got sucked into the power of being a king and often went astray. And so it was always the prophet's role to call the king or to call the leaders or to call the nation back to God. So that becomes their main point. And we'll look at that a little bit tonight, because what God was trying to do in the Old Testament, beginning there in the Torah, Andrea, is to create a distinct people. And as we talked about covenant last week, part of that covenant was to be a distinct people because God was going to bless all the nations of the earth through them. And for them to be a blessing to all the nations of the earth, they had to be somewhat different from all the other nations on the earth. And in other words, they had to be distinct. And if they weren't, then they wouldn't be able to do, if they were the same as all the other nations, then there wouldn't be anything unique or distinct about them to be a blessing to the rest of the world. And so that becomes the prophet's role, is when everything seems to be going to hell. He's the one who says, let's turn around, let's get our act together, and let's change our ways before God brings a consequence on us that we're not going to like. So that becomes the main function there of the prophets. Dawn, you were saying in one of the videos it talked about Isaiah, and what was it that was said that was either troubling or concern to you?
Yeah, it was a little both.
Okay.
But just that they said that he walked naked around for 3 years. You probably got a student in every time you teach this class that asks this question. But because I've never heard it before, I can't remember, and I'm not, I don't read a whole lot of Isaiah.
Mhm.
I read it through a couple times, but this morning when I was studying about that, I was looking up some things. There's a rabbi, but there's I guess he's a rabbi. He says Joseph Sasson or something like that, Rabbi Torah Study in
Mhm.
Yeshiva. He says, I see some have suggested that he wasn't naked, but in tattered clothing, and that's correct. In Gemara Shabbat 114a, I don't know what that is, Rabbi Yochanan explains that Isaiah was not naked, but wore ragged clothing and patched up shoes for 3 years. He was bereft of all normal clothing, wearing rags, which in itself a certain form of nakedness. Certainly the Torah standards for modesty dictate that he could not show his flesh, especially his male sexual organ. He had he done so and violated the Torah, he would have been immediately identified as a false prophet, and the Jews would reject him and disregard his prophecy. But rather the opposite happened. And so then it just goes on to talk a little bit more about that. The very end of that first paragraph, it says, he was clothed, but he went tattered, which by his usually impeccable standard of dress was a certain form of nakedness, not a literal one, a poetic one. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
You know, I'll have to be honest, that's maybe the first time I've heard anyone in a class bring that up.
Okay.
Yeah, really interesting. And yeah, I can't tell you too much about it. There is a verse, it's in Isaiah 20, that refers to him. And again, but I don't know much of the backstory. Honestly, I don't. And so, yeah, of course, what you're reading is quite true, that there were some, standards of modesty that we wouldn't, I mean, if you were to take someone from Isaiah's day and even bring him into our world right now, they would probably be aghast at what they see because of the lack of modesty that our culture seems to live by. And so, yeah, but I couldn't tell you that. Yeah, it does say that there is a, that there's something going on, that he is to take his sackcloth, which again is symbolic. So maybe there's it is both literal as well as symbolic. The idea of mourning, of grieving, and they would put on a specific type of garment, a sackcloth it was referred to. And so he is being told to remove his sackcloth, to leave his mourning. And it says, to go about without it, or however it says, whether it uses the word naked or stripped or whatever. So it's hard to say. I would have to look at the Hebrew, and being I don't really understand Hebrew very well, I would have to rely on experts like those people you were talking about.
Right.
Is it a literal nakedness? Is it a stripped down? Okay, because you're no longer wearing the garment of mourning, and each could be a different interpretation or an expression of that same thought, but it would come out in different ways. So I don't know which way. I really don't know which way. I don't have any way of even really probably getting to it.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just wondering. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that like we weren't getting information that was, not biblical. That's all.
Yeah.
Because somebody taught me a long time ago that if it doesn't line up with the word of God, throw it out. Like, don't study out of it. Don't study from it. And so that's why I was like,
I'll say something else. Even if there's something in the Bible, be careful not to take everything as if everything in it is the most important thing, because it's not. And, you might be reading and doing a devotional, maybe we'll do our devotion out of 1 Corinthians 8, like Pia led us tonight, or maybe your devotion takes you to Isaiah 20. And then in that, verse 2 or 3, somewhere in there, it talks about, him being naked. And then you have to try to figure out what in the world's going on here. Clearly, it's not the most important part of the Isaiah message. And clearly, even that is not the most important part of what's in the scripture. So I wouldn't let it get you stumbling over it too much. But it is weird. It is kind of weird. How does it fit, and which is right, and which is one of the hard parts about translation still today. When there are questions, it's hard to know because you can't go back 3,000 years and look at the video footage. We don't have that, you know. We don't know exactly. We only have what the written word is, and because it's been translated, you know, from Hebrew now into our English, from an ancient language from almost 3,000 years ago till now, how does the language change and shift, and what was intended to be, you know, what is the author's original intent? What was it? And we may not know for sure. And that becomes part of the exegetical problem we have of understanding it. But again, from a hermeneutical standpoint, I would say I wouldn't worry about it. That's clearly not going to be a question. One of the questions on our entrance into heaven exam. You know, was Isaiah really naked, or was he just merely stripped of his sackcloth in Isaiah 20? You don't have to know the answer to that to get into heaven. You just got to know. You just got to know the other answer, the answer about who is Jesus. So, but that's a good question, and I appreciate you kind of catching that, because that is kind of a weird one. And whoever it was who told you that, I think gave you good advice, though. Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff out there. Some of it pretends to be biblical or semi-biblical, and you have to be really careful. Yeah, good.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, again, so Isaiah is the one who kind of kicks us off. But again, the role of the prophet, and again, understand this, that when there was when in the Torah, when God is calling the people out to be a unique people, they did not have a king because God was their king. A few centuries later, they decided to have a king so they could be like everybody else. That was kind of their push. They wanted to be like all the nations around them. Why does everybody else have a king, but we don't? And so God allows for them to have a king, an earthly king, a human king. But as he does so, he sets up kind of a three-pronged way for Israel to operate. There was going to be the political wing, which would be the king. There would be the function of the priest in the temple, which would be a key piece of being the those who would bring offerings or sacrifice, speak for the people on behalf of the people to God. And then there would also be a prophet, and the prophet would function in that kind of that inverse role, where his role would be to be a spokesperson for God to the people, sometimes specifically to the king, but always with that authority, not authority that the prophet had for any other reason, except that his authority was rooted in his words being God's words for the people. So when Nathan speaks to David and tells him that you are the man who took this sheep away from a poor person, when he was referring to David's adultery, taking Bathsheba and killing her husband. And he's able to say, that's you. And because of that, God is not pleased and you're going to die. David doesn't say, well, who says you have the authority to put a death sentence on me? No, he understands that Nathan is speaking on behalf of God. And so oftentimes we'll see it, and you'll see it in Isaiah and in a lot of the other prophets, that they will reference something called it's a divine encounter. In Isaiah 6, it talks about that. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. And he talks about this whole thing where he is kind of taken up into the throne room of heaven, and he is given a vision that he is then to bring and relay that to the people. And we'll see that in a number of times in various prophets. They'll talk about this vision they received. And so it is for them then to speak it as clearly and truthfully and thoroughly as they can, so that the people have a chance to hear from God as well. But the problem is that as the days were going by, and the years were going by, and the centuries were going by, they were getting further and further away from their foundation of being God's people. And so the time was coming where, for example, by this time, historically, there's two different nations. There's a northern kingdom called Israel. There's a southern kingdom called Judah. And it's part of the history of the Bible. And at first, the northern kingdom of Israel is going to fall. It's going to be taken over by the Syrians. And the Syrians are going to punish Israel for, basically, they'll be God's consequence for Israel's negligence of the Torah and the covenant. And so they will pay the price for that. They will be taken away from their country and moved off into exile. A couple of generations later, the southern kingdom will suffer the same fate, although it'll be with the Persians who will come then. And because the Persians had now become the world rulers, and they will take them, the Babylonians and the Persians, would then take them into exile. But the prophets were speaking during this time where the nation is moving farther and farther away, and yet God continues to try to call them back to himself. So tonight I'd like to take a look at one of the other prophets, one of the lesser known ones. His name is Amos. And so we're going to take a look at Amos and just look at a little bit of what's happening here in the book of Amos. The book of Amos, you can look in the table of contents, or you can turn in your Bibles. It's going to be about page 1300. And we're going to look at chapter 8 in the book of Amos. And chapter 8 in the book of Amos is on page 1311. Okay, so on 1311 is where we find Amos 8. And again, Amos was one of the prophets in the northern kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel. And so he is talking to Israel before their fall into captivity, as a warning, saying this is coming because we have gone too far for too long, and we have not listened to the voice of other prophets, and so the end is coming. And so what we'll go ahead and take a look at chapter 8, and there's some interesting things here, and we'll just kind of read it aloud together, and then I'll talk about a couple of questions for us to look at. In fact, let me do a real quick screen share with my Amos. Here we go. And so as we look at it, these are going to be some of the questions. I'll take these first 2 or 3. We're going to be looking at Amos 8, and as we read it together, notice the times when he speaks about either social position or economic practices, because a lot of Amos 8 is about things that people were doing, not so much their often we think repent means we need to repent, means we need to come back and get in right relationship with God. But Amos is going to say the way we show our right relationship with God is in the way that we function as a community together. And so we'll look at that. We'll look at social and economic practices that we find in this chapter. We're going to also look at some of the religious practices. You might, as we read it, you might listen for some and say, hey, that's a religious practice. What's going on here? And then we'll look at the connections. How do those two fit together? And but we'll look at it and then have to ask that question: how is God revealing himself, and what's going on here? How appropriate or how applicable is what's going on in Israel in Amos's day? Is this message from Amos still applicable for us today? Because that becomes the challenge for us. If this was a vision given to Amos from God for the people in his day, how do we use that in our present day, even though we're 2,700 years later? So that being said, I'll come back to this screen in a bit, but for now, I'm going to just come back. So I need a couple of readers, a couple of volunteers who could read parts of this chapter 8 together with me.
I'll read.
First volunteer is going to go from chapter 1 or chapter 8, verse 1 through verse 3. And then we'll have someone go from 4 to 6, and then probably 7 to 8 or 9. And then we'll figure out where we're going from there. So I need at least 3, maybe even a 4th reader. So who's my first reader?
I will.
Dawn. Okay, so chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Tell us all about this basket of summer fruit that Amos is talking about. This is what God, this is the vision that God gives him.
Okay. So this is what the Lord God showed me, a basket of summer fruit. He said, Amos, what do you see? And I said, a basket of summer fruit. Then the Lord said to me, the end has come upon my people Israel. I will never again pass them by. The songs of the temple shall become wailings in that day, says the Lord God. The dead bodies shall be many, cast out in every place. Be silent.
Wow. Don, you bummed me out. That's a
Yeah.
bummer of a saying. Now you see why we don't read Amos very often. But what's going on here? Okay, so he is given a vision. What is the vision?
The summer fruit, a basket of summer fruit.
Basket of summer fruit. It's kind of a weird way of beginning this phrase, but what's happening here is what do you think? If you're to try to interpret that, what is the basket of summer fruit symbolize that God is using as part of his vision to pass his message along to Amos? We'll read a little bit more in a minute, but let's just, before we get on beyond the summer fruit, what's that about? Anyone?
Is it like the birth of people to come, new people, birth of new people?
It's the end of, it's right after he says that, says the Lord said to me, the end has come upon my people.
Okay, so that's a good clue right there if you're looking at it just from it. Yeah, Robin, that's a good because we are talking about something that's coming down the road. But yeah, this is talking about the end, and the picture, the visual that he's using is a basket of summer fruit. And really that's kind of what is, that's a symbol. Now, I don't know about you. I live here in, well, you know where I live. I live right here in the valley with all of you guys. So summer fruit, when you think of summer fruit, what do you think of?
Peaches.
Peaches. Oh yeah, I love
Favorite.
peaches. Anybody else? Other summer fruit?
Strawberry.
Strawberries. Okay, good. Those are good choices. Any others?
Grapes.
Grapes. Okay, that's a good one too. And especially if you lived where you grew grapes, Terry. It's not so good if you go to Save Mart and buy grapes because it's a different animal. Those are what, grown in Argentina or whatever, but still it's their fruit. Okay, but take strawberries for example, or peaches. Those are good examples that we grow right here, and those are good summer fruits for us. If any of you have a peach tree, say in your backyard, what is the best part of having that peach tree?
Peaches all the time.
Okay, peaches. Well, in the right time.
Yeah.
Not all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're great. There's nothing better than a fresh, ripe peach, is there?
Nope.
Okay, what's the downside of having a peach tree in your backyard? Anyone?
Makes a mess.
Oh, good. Who said that? That was Dawn? Yes.
If I had a peach tree in my backyard, it makes a mess.
It makes a mess. And how does that delicious, ripe, sweet fruit make a mess in your backyard?
The peaches fall off. You get bees in the flowers before the peaches start to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Then the birds come and pick all your delicious peaches, and you have holes in your peaches, and that's when they fall off. They just make a mess on the ground.
Yeah, they make a mess, and then they attract all kinds of other bugs and flying things, and they smell beautiful, don't they?
Fermented, yeah.
Yep. And see, that's really, if you were to boil it down and you say, what in the world is going on with this summer fruit basket? That's what he's talking about. That summer fruit, there's nothing like it. It is so good. Unless it goes a day too long. Unless it's past its prime. And then there's really nothing quite as bad as it. It smells, like I say, it attracts bugs. It does everything that you wouldn't want to have going on in your kitchen, is going on in your kitchen. And so when he says there's a basket of summer fruit and the end has come, that's a symbol. That's something that was made to be so sweet, so good, so ripe, but it is no longer. And because it is no longer, ripe, sweet, good. It's rotten. It smells, it's fermenting. It is only thing you can do is cast it out. And so it becomes kind of an image or a symbol of what's about to happen because things have gotten rotten. I didn't try to rhyme there, but that's what has happened. Because things have gotten rotten, you got to toss it out. And he's saying that's what you, Israel, have become. You are a basket of summer fruit. So why would he say that? Just because God doesn't like them? No, we know that God loves them. He's in a covenant God relationship with them, that his desire is to not only to bless them, but to bless all the world through them. But yet, because of their disobedience, something has happened that God's patience is now running out on them. And that's what we're about to see. What is it that has caused God to say, you are like a basket of summer fruit? You are now beginning to stink and your end has come. So our verse 4 through, let's go through 4 through 6. Next reader. Who would be my next reader? Thank you, Dawn, for reading number 1.
You're welcome.
Okay, Andrea?
Hear this, you that trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over, so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, so that we may offer wheat for sale? We will make the ephah small and the shekel great, and practice deceit with false balances, buying the poor and silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, and selling the sweepings of the wheat.
Okay, let's stop there. We're going to go on. But this is what's at the core of God's anger, which has led him to this point of saying, you are going to receive punishment here, not because I am a mean God, but because actions have consequences. What are the actions that are bringing the consequences of this end? Did you see anything in that section that, Andrea, you read, or anybody else wants to jump in? What are some of the practices that seem to be distasteful to God?
Trample over the needy.
Okay, there's a trample the needy right off the top. That's the first thing, that instead of being a people distinct from all the other nations around them where the needy were cared for, which, as you've been reading in Keller's Generous Justice or Grassi, you're reading about that. That is key and foundational to how God was establishing this new nation, Israel. We see instead, Amos says that instead of that, they, like everybody else, trample on the needy. What else?
They bring ruin to the poor of the land.
Okay, right. And again, the most impoverished or the most vulnerable would be the ones that need to have a little extra space or a buffer for them, and yet that is not happening. The poor of the land are being ruined. So who is probably, oh, go ahead, Robin, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, are they buying slaves?
You know, they may well be buying slaves. It doesn't use the word slaves, but it does talk about buying people, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, buying the poor for silver. So that may be a way of expressing that there is slavery going on, that instead of being neighborly to one another, they're taking advantage of each other to the point where they're buying slaves from within their own people. Or it may be a little bit metaphorical, that they are just taking advantage of, that they are you know, using as a resource the poor in their midst for their own economic gain or advantage. But that's good catch. Anything else? Okay, so take a look again. Well, before we move on, take a look there again at that verses 4 to 6 that we just had read for us. If there are any other economic points we can make, or any, then moving into the second one, any religious practices that you saw lifted up during this time, because how is that going to affect
So
what God is upset about?
is selling the sweeping of the wheat, weren't they supposed to give the food to the needy and share the crops that they grew, not sell them?
Yeah, and right, you're going to see that again. You'll see that in Keller. You'll see that in Grassi. You would read it in the Torah and some of the early parts, especially in like Deuteronomy and such. But you'll see that there is a caring for the widow. There's a caring for the orphan. There's a caring for the alien in your midst. The vulnerable that are there is a key piece of that. And so you're right. Selling the sweepings, which means even that which is of no value, you pick up every little last bit and you sell it so that you can get the most gain out of it, as opposed to leaving a boundary or being generous or helping those who are less fortunate. So that becomes part of it, that sweepings of wheat. And again, most of us we don't go to the store and buy wheat. We tend to go and buy products with wheat in them. But in this day, that was how food was sold. You buy it by the wheat and then how it got taken care of. Any religious practices you see beginning to be highlighted here?
I don't know exactly what it means, but I know the new moon has something to do with a religious practice. I'm not confident in what that is though.
Good. Well, you know enough about it, Dawn, and that's fine. It's really all you need to know. It was a religious festival in this time, in this place, where they would set aside a time to, again, for no work, only to celebrate, kind of an extended Thanksgiving. And so this becomes, again, it's one of those, they had a number of festivals in the Old Testament calendar. This would have been one of them, but it would have been, again, a time where people were to set aside their labor for the purpose of giving God thanks. And so when it mentions the new moon, it doesn't really mention about how they practice that new moon, but it talks about hoping for it to be over soon. And why would people want it to be over soon?
There's no selling.
Who doesn't like a party? Come on. Yeah, no, because you're right. Because there's not going to be any selling. There's not going to be any commerce. There's not going to be any work allowed. And so because of that, we want to get past that real quick, get over this religious thing so that we can get back to the business of
making money.
Making money. Yeah, making money.
Because they didn't do anything on the Sabbath either. So that makes sense now that the festival was going on and they wanted to hurry up and get over so they could sell their grain in the Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Sabbath. So again, similar. It's a similar thing for that day. That's not a multi-day event, but it is an every week event where the Sabbath would come and they wouldn't be able to sell. They wouldn't be able to reap. They wouldn't be able to do any of those things. And they were hoping for that, for the new moon to be over so we can sell grain, and the Sabbath to be over. It doesn't say that, but it could, so that we may offer wheat for sale. So yeah, so these religious practices, the religious festivals or the weekly Sabbath, seem to get in the way of the people, because instead of wanting to honor God with that time, they are wanting to be about making money.
Greed.
The almighty dollar.
Yep.
Although they wouldn't say the word dollar because they didn't know what a dollar was.
The almighty shekel.
The almighty shekel. There you go. Good. And that's another piece. Thank you, Andrew. You did a nice job of dealing with that. There's a couple of parts in there that we struggle with, though. In verse 5, for example, it says, we will make the ephah small and the shekel great. Now, if you don't know what an ephah is or a shekel, then this doesn't make much sense. What it is the ephah is a measurement that we're not used to. We deal with what, ounces and gallons and or milliliters or millimeters, whatever. But this is a measurement that you would use, for example, with wheat. You might buy a wheat, it's like a basket, a specific size of a basket of measurement that people would buy their produce by that. And so it's an ephah. To say I'm going to make this ephah small, it'd be like saying I'm going to go and buy a gallon of milk at the store, but the grocery store is going to make our gallon small. And the shekel great. In other words, they're going to make it more expensive. The cost of the how much it is, the money of it is going to be made greater. And so maybe you've seen this. Maybe you go to the store and maybe you buy products that maybe before you look back and you say, hey, that packaging is a lot smaller than it used to be, but yet the price is more. You ever
Can
seen
I say
that?
what I see? Yes, ice cream. Hello.
Ice cream, no kidding.
It went from 2
Yeah,
to
try-
4.5. And they put it up $1 more.
I know.
Like, what
So
is up with that?
what happened to the old half gallon, huh? Come on.
Exactly.
Is that the new way of saying the cost of living go up and everything go up?
Yeah, you know, it is. And
Nowadays, right?
that's what was happening back here too. But it's, you know, it wouldn't be so bad, Don, if they had the price go down along with the packaging going
Yeah.
down. But it doesn't. It goes the other way around, doesn't it?
Yep.
Or then the last part, right on that same phrase, they practice deceit with false balances. What is that talking about? Okay, so imagine a time when, because we don't have the packaging like we do today, you wanted to go buy X amount of meat, and you know, they didn't have those little printers that put labels on their meat, and so you'd have to measure out X certain amount, but you would put it on a scale, right? And it would weigh how much that is, and then depending on how much it was, you would pay the price for that. So when it talks about, excuse me, false balances, it would be like the person who puts the meat on the scale at the store now, but then puts their hand on the scale as well, pushing it down, making it seem like it's more than you're getting more than you actually are. So the price goes up even more. If someone did that today in the store, what would you say?
Usually you
Cheater.
get your hand off of there.
Yeah, get your hand off there. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Pia?
I say cheater.
Cheater. Yes,
Cheater.
that's exactly right. And so what Amos is describing here for all of us is a place where cheating is the norm, and you go into the market and someone's going to try to rip you off. It's not just selling you a product for the price that it is, but it's taking advantage of those, especially, as you can see in here, as we're talking about, especially taking advantage of the poor.
I
Um,
see. Don't worry.
And so that becomes kind of problematic for the nation of Israel. This, instead of being a place where people could trust that your word is good, it becomes there are false balances. We're taking advantage of people, and most especially taking advantage of the poor, buying the poor for silver, buying the needy for a pair of sandals. And again, whether that, Robin, whether that means actually purchasing somebody, or because you get them a pair of sandals, now they owe you and they will have to work for you, for something as insignificant as a pair of sandals that you now have. They are now somehow indebted to you, and it becomes a system, an economic system that is no longer fair, no longer just, no longer gives help to the poor, but it takes advantage of the poor and marginalizes them further, because the people who win are going to be the people with wealth. We could go on, but that's, there's more in this. And again, it's going to talk about this time when this time is coming and bad things are going to happen to the nation. And of course they are. Looking at history, you're going to see that it wouldn't be long until the, which group was this? This would have been the Syrians, would come down, and they would take over this country and carry many of the people, probably Amos and others, off into exile, because the nation of Israel was no longer acting as this distinctly godly country. but it's not the religious practices. I mean, because they are still doing new moon festivals. They're still doing Sabbath. They're honoring it. They're at least getting through the Sabbath without selling, but they're doing so begrudgingly. And it's like the religion becomes a burden. And the thing that's most important is accumulating wealth and taking advantage of those who are disadvantaged around us. And so this becomes, I think this is kind of still problematic today, and maybe it's still a contemporary issue, the struggle we have in our world, because I think we still have that issue, don't we, where it's easy for those who are in advantaged situations to continue to profit, while people who are in difficult spots seem always to have extra disadvantages to overcome. Can you think of any examples of that someone who is on maybe the lower end of our socioeconomic scale has even more, either their communities they live in or individually they have even larger burdens or hurdles, just because of the way it is?
Foster children?
Foster children. That's a great example of kids who have special needs and are disadvantaged, aren't they?
Yep. I think that there's not enough resources for children that live in foster care, and especially when they transition out of the foster care, there's not really much that kind of establishes them and gets them to where they need to be in adulthood. There's not really much guidance for them.
And so we shouldn't be too surprised when they don't turn out real well, or if they have struggles and wind up in the bad side of town.
Yeah, when society deems them as misfits or
right.
Troublemakers. So.
Right. And so we shouldn't be surprised by that, but maybe that is a good call for us, Robin, very much like what Amos is talking about here, to look at our practices that might lead to that, rather and to address them with generosity and charity, instead of saying, well, that's their own darn fault, or whatever we tend to say, how it is we turn a blind eye to the injustice around us. Any other examples you want to point out that might be something that would be an item of injustice, whether it be economic or otherwise, that tends to make people who are on the lower end of one of these vulnerable groups, especially more vulnerable?
The homeless, I mean, that could actually, like what Robin was talking about, I worked with kids in group homes, and once they're 18 years old, they just cut them loose. Like there's nothing for them. A lot of them end up in gangs and on the streets. Well, a lot of them are already in gangs. Sure. But they end up on the streets with nowhere to go, in and out of emissions, trying to eat and sleep and, take a shower occasionally. A lot of people are biased towards the homeless, but it's not always their fault that they're out there. Maybe some by choice, others by mental health or just, circumstances. Think about how many people lost their jobs and homes just during the past year for COVID. Because of COVID, so I think the homeless population is greatly misunderstood.
Yeah. Now, Terry, you've been down to the D Street shelter. I know I've seen you there a few times. Do you get a chance to talk to any of the residents there, the people who are homeless, who are living out on the streets in Merced? No.
Yeah, I did get to talk to people. I don't think I ever really asked them how they got there, but I just interacted with them.
Okay.
But yeah, there were a variety. I mean, all ages.
Yeah. Yeah. The times that I've had a chance to talk to them, I think that's the thing I mostly find is similar to what Don said. It's maybe one bad decision or one bad turn. Something didn't go well. A young lady with a couple of kids and her boyfriend kicks them out, and they have no place to go, no family around. Where do you turn? That just, maybe that's on her, but it's just a tough spot. Someone's out, and all of a sudden they don't have a job any longer, can't find another job right away, and before you know it, they are evicted and there's no place to turn. What do you do? You know, it's like, okay, now you're labeled as homeless, and it becomes more of a challenge. You know, how do you then apply for a job if you're not able to go looking like you deserve a job or want the job? You know, how do you do it if you don't have an address for them to contact you or what have you? There's just a lot of different things that kind of play into it, and becomes very complicated. Now, and I'm sure Terry, you can agree with me here too. Some of the people there do have some mental health issues, or maybe you're coming out of addictive cycles where substances have been in the way and have wrecked their lives. But even then, you know, there could be ways that we could deal with that in a different way, quite possibly. But because we tend to want to ignore it, and it's not my problem, we kind of keep them at arm's distance. Which is why I think it's so great that you can just go and talk with them, even if you're not asking how it is they wound up there. You get a chance to talk to them, look them in the eye, and they know that you care enough to come down and to sit and talk to them. So something very profound about human contact. But again, when we look at Amos 8, and I just want to just use that as an example, that's what we're going to find more of in the prophets. Then you will find some places in the prophets where they're talking about in Micah that, you know, the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem, or in Isaiah that the Messiah is going to suffer and die, and by his stripes we are healed. You know, there's a lot of prophecy that points to the coming of God's ultimate hope through his Messiah, but there's much, much more material here that says this is why we are out of place in our relationship to God, and it really is how it is that we're dealing with or not dealing with the less fortunate in our communities. And so Amos becomes, I think, a good example. This summer fruit basket, the reason it is rotting is because they are no longer caring for the needy around them, and it becomes really it's a very bleak rest of the chapter in what happens following Amos. Historically is a pretty bleak time for them as well. So is that still a contemporary issue? Or do we still have the poor amongst us? Do we still have those who the system does not work to serve, but actually continues to keep them in a place of difficulty? Robin, you said with foster kids, that's where they're at, and you're right, it's true. I
think another very vulnerable population that society kind of, you know, keeps at bay is the immigrants. That you know, they're on the influx. You know, there's more and more of them. It seems like more people coming in, and there's really, I don't know, just I feel like as a nation we make it harder for them to succeed and prosper, when that's kind of something that this land was founded on, is, you know, people coming in from different areas.
Yeah, and we can argue that and do all the political, you know, football kicking back and forth about legal and illegal and what have you. But you're right. Let's just boil it down. We don't deal really well with people who are different, especially newcomers, regardless of what direction they seem to be coming from, and we never do. I mean, it's just one of those things that we struggle with, and Israel struggled with that, even though, again, as you read back into Deuteronomy, what have you, it was coming out of their identity as being an immigrant group, you know, living in Egypt when they weren't Egyptians, moving to the Promised Land under Moses when that wasn't their homeland either. And so to establish a different way of dealing with the alien is part of the Old Testament teaching. But you're right, it's a hard thing for us because we're humans, and we tend to, birds of a feather tend to flock together. So good. Anyone else? Because I think Amos is still appropriate. I think Amos still translates. But the problem is when we open it up and we read, I saw a vision of summer fruit, we say, what? This makes no sense to me. I'm not going to bother reading it. But if we do read it, maybe we say, yeah, Robin, we say, hey, you know, there are people here. Maybe it's a different groups than were going on 2,700 years ago. but the groups are still similar to that. Go ahead, Pia.
Professor John, since we're talking about these peaches, it just I never get over with it. What happened if, you know, in reality, can we blame the peaches for rotten? I mean, I want to keep it as sweet, as ripe, but how can we preserve that? Because in fact, I know that the peach don't want to go rotten, and they want to stay so that the human can like them, the bees can like them, so that they will never share and never become that rotten peaches. Can they be blamed for something like that too? Because the nature, you have to, your time is over. You cannot be beauty all the time. You gotta go. Is that something that to be covered? I just can't think of something like that.
That's a good question, because I don't think anyone's going to blame the peach. The peach is doing what the peach does. It grows when it grows, it gets ripe when it gets ripe, and then it gets overripe in its time. And I don't think this is saying that they are completely like a peach, except they're like a peach that has gone too long, because they had chances to turn around. You know, if yesterday, instead of leaving the peach on the patio, I had brought the peach in and put in the refrigerator, maybe the next day it would still be good, but because I left it out in the sun, it's rotten now and it's not good for me anymore. So what I should have done was yesterday put it in the fridge. And maybe that Amos would say the same thing. It's too late for you now. What you should have done was not take advantage of the poor. You should have not abused the immigrant. You should have not sold the poor for silver or for a pair of sandals. You should not have taken advantage of people, but because you did, your status as being, you know, God's holy people is no longer yours.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, he's saying that your actions have consequences. And he's not saying, hey, it's just the way peaches go, you know, it's just how it is. No, he's saying your actions have consequences. But these are the actions. He doesn't say you didn't pray enough. He doesn't say you didn't go to church enough. He doesn't say you didn't give enough money to the church. He doesn't say any of those things that we might associate with what does it mean to be, you know, a good 21st century North American Christian. You didn't go to enough Bible studies. You didn't teach Sunday school often enough. None of those things find their way in here. It all has to do with how we treat those who are most vulnerable in our midst. Every single one of these has to do with people who are on the bottom end being ripped off by the system and by the people who run the system, which in this case was, of course, Jewish people living in Israel. And so that's what the message of Amos becomes. It's like, okay, don't do what seems to be natural for everyone to do, which is try to rip your way off to the top and take advantage of those beneath you.
Makes sense.
Okay. See, now you got me hungry for peaches though, Pia. That does sound good. So that's the prophets, and the prophets were a big part of this week, and you'll see some more videos. They're good videos. I don't want to belabor that too much more. But then we're also going to move on this week into something called the wisdom literature of the Bible. We looked at that. You'll see a video or two about that as well. You'll be looking at the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job in particular. Those three books we refer to as the wisdom literature of the Bible. And they're all really different. And you'll see, again, I don't want to belabor the videos, but they really all take on different roles. The book of Proverbs is a collection of short sayings that are either the way it is or the way it ought to be. And sometimes it's hard to tell which he's saying. Is it an is or is it an ought to be? But every culture really does this. They have little sayings that somehow hold on to a cultural value of the community. And by saying them, you pass them along. And pretty soon you may not even know where they came from, but they just become part of our culture. I think of some words like this. Two wrongs don't make what?
Right.
A right. Good. Okay, that's good. Hey, how about this? A picture is worth, what's a picture worth?
1,000 words,
Yeah. Is it really?
depending on who the picture's of.
Yeah, it depends on, yeah. Some pictures might be, some pictures not so much. How about birds of a feather? Anyone know that one? What do birds of a feather do?
Flock together.
Flock
Beautiful.
together. Way to go, Andrea. That's right. Yeah, Pia's trying to figure this one out. See, you weren't raised here in America. Maybe you didn't hear these things growing up,
No.
and so they're going to seem really weird to you. How about the squeaky wheel? Anyone know anything about a squeaky wheel? What's a squeaky wheel get?
Gets the wheel.
The oil.
It gets the oil, right? It gets the oil, gets the grease. That's right. So look at you, Pia. Way to go.
Yeah.
Maybe there's proverbs that y'all know that you can think of. But these are not from the Bible. These are just, again, the way we kind of hold on to some community value and we keep it in a way that we can pass it along. They're little short, memorable sayings, which is basically, if you were to look up what a proverb is, that's what they would be. And in the book of Proverbs, there is a collection from roughly about 3,000 years ago. King Solomon put this collection together and gathered up all this various wisdom from around and put it in this book. And they're just a collection of sayings, sayings not all that different from that. There's a few. I've run across some others, and I want to. This is kind of fun for people who like. Oh, what did I do there? I did something. I didn't take you guys with me. I went to screen share. I didn't share it with you. This. I love this. Get it right here, John. I love this saying. This comes from Ethiopia. Again, not from the Bible, not from our culture, but in Ethiopia, they say, no matter how many times you wash a goat, it will still smell like a goat. That's true. Even if I didn't own goats, and maybe this is true not just for goats. Maybe this is just a truth that you can't hide some things, no matter how much you might try. Or there's a few here. I love some of these. These were proverbs that first graders filled in the gap. Can you see these? Proverbs according to first graders.
Mm-hmm.
You can't teach an old dog. Now you probably know what this is, how we say this, but maybe in first graders they come up with this. You can't teach an old dog new math. To a first grader, a penny saved is not much. Yeah, see, these aren't really good proverbs, but that's how a first grader thinks, okay? Maybe you've heard the phrase two's company, but three's a crowd. Maybe you know that one? Yeah, well, for first graders, they don't know that, so they say two's company, three's the musketeers. Okay. Anyone want to try to fill this one in? Children should be seen, but not
Heard.
Of course, spanked. Right. You all got it right. And a bird in the hand is, yeah, obviously, it's going to poop on you. That's what a first grader would say.
That was my first thought.
Yeah, good. There you go. See, you're thinking like a first grader, Dawn.
All right, cool.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. But no, what makes us smile at those is that they sound like what kids would actually say, but they're not really what the proverb that we knew or what we expected it to be was. And so again, these are not proverbs that come from the Bible. These are proverbs that come out of our culture, and they mean something a little bit more. They mean something more than maybe what we even understand. I was just thinking a bird in the, oh yeah, a bird in the hand. How about that one? That's a fun one, right? Is going to poop on you. Okay, but how does that really end? How do we normally say that?
I've never heard that one.
You've never heard about a bird in the hand? Nobody? Pia, help me out.
I think they're gonna fly away.
They're going to fly away. Yeah, a bird in the hand is going to fly away. No, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Oh.
Nope.
Didn't know that one, huh? Okay.
No, hold up.
Well, most of us don't go catching birds, I guess. But again, that's an example of a cultural, saying. It's wisdom that if you've got something, rather than giving up what you have to pursue what you may never get, it's better to be happy with what you have. So a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush, because you may not get either one of those. So
Makes sense.
but again, I've never tried to catch a bird in the bush, so I can understand why you guys don't know that one. But
That
again,
makes
most
sense.
proverbs are that way. That's kind of how they have a little bit of a history that kind of keeps us tied in. So, and again, for the proverbs in our Bible, we refer to those as conventional wisdom or prudential wisdom, because they are the way things ought to be, or raise up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That is a good example of a proverb that is the way things ought to be. It becomes good advice for us that we should raise up our kids in the proper way, because our hope or our goal is that when they get old, then they will stay on the right path. But we need to be careful that when we talk about things as they ought to be, these are not promises. Because as you and I all know, if you have kids, that they also are free agents in this world, and you can do your very best to raise them, and they still may do things that are their decision, their choice, very little to do maybe with what you do. But it's better to raise your child in the way they should go. It still is saying that this is the right way to go. And if you're playing the odds, things are going to come out better on the whole if you do it this way. But it may not be a foolproof plan. It may not be a promise from God that we can put on our bumper sticker and say that because of this, my kids have no choice. They can't make a bad decision in life, because that's quite honestly not how it goes. So, but it becomes part of that. They become verses that remind us of how it is that we can live our life, maybe live our life a little bit more effectively. So let's do this. Let's take a look at some of the Proverbs. And so I'm going to invite you to, in your Bibles, let's turn to Proverbs 15. That is on, let's switch my glasses so I can see that. Page 924, if you're reading along. But in the book of Proverbs, again, this is the best example. And the other books I mentioned, Ecclesiastes and Job, do wisdom in completely a different way. And those books are usually categorized as what we call speculative wisdom. That's they look at it kind of the opposite, looking for when things don't go right, when things don't go well, how do we begin to find our footing or find our bearings? Proverbs is supposed to help us by giving us kind of a pathway to take. Okay, Proverbs 15, verse 1, it starts with a soft answer. Who would be willing to read that? We're going to read about 6 of these. So go ahead. Who would like the first one?
I'll take it.
Take it, please.
A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The
Okay.
tongue.
No, stop right there. You're good. Just one at a time, because that's what they are. These are all little one-liners or one-liner with a comma in the middle. The idea that this soft word or soft answer turns away wrath. How could we apply that, Robin?
Just speaking kindly to people makes them feel kindly towards you.
There you
And
go. We could just say that's we could rephrase it, and that's what we could say, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, good. Okay, number 2. You see the little 2 there? Read on down to where the period is. Who would take number 2? Okay, go ahead, Shannon.
Wise dispenses knowledge, but the mouths of fools pour out folly.
Okay, if we were to put that into modern English, what would we say?
Looking for a nice word. Uneducated or ignorant people speak incorrect truths.
Yeah, Yeah. So maybe if you're looking for someone to listen to or follow their advice, maybe be careful who you're listening to, huh? Because there is difference between those who are wise and those who are foolish, at least as the Proverbs lay them out for us. Good. Okay. So know who you're listening to, or follow good advice, not foolish advice. You can almost hear your moms telling you this, couldn't you, when you were 14 years old? Yeah, a lot of this sounds like something your folks would say to you. Okay, number 3, who would do it?
Well,
Hey, Pia.
the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. That means he
Okay.
sees everything.
That's right. And so this isn't so much what we should do, but it's just, again, a reminder of something that is very true, right? That God's everywhere and his eyes are everywhere. So where can we go to hide from him? Probably nowhere. Okay. Good. Okay, number 4. Who would take number 4 about a gentle tongue again? Maybe Andrea. Yeah.
We can't hear you, Andrea.
Sorry.
There you go. You read it again for us?
A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perseverance in it breaks the spirit.
Okay, it's not perseverance, it's perverseness, which is a different word. I know right. How many times do you read perverseness today?
I was like, that just okay.
Yeah.
I saw it wrong.
Yep, no problem. But it does change the meaning of it. So again, to try to translate that for us, what would you think, Andrea?
Gentle tongue is a tree of life. So a kind word is a tree of life,
Mm-hmm.
but an ugly word can break the spirit.
Good. There you go. So true that. And so again, if we see a couple of them here about the way we talk to others, that's not normal. I mean, there's these Proverbs talk about a lot of different things. A couple of them here have been about the words we choose. Okay, who would do number 5?
I would love to, but my books is ebooks. The page is different. I can't find them. So you got
Okay. All right, then I'll have
Definitely.
Terry do this one. Okay. So just listen up here. Go ahead. Number 5.
A fool despises a parent's instruction, but the one who heeds admonition is prudent.
Okay. So again, Terry, how could we break that down? What would we say about that verse? What's it trying to tell us?
So, if a child or you or anybody really was to ask their parent or perhaps an older person a question and they get the whatever their response and they just ignore it,
Mm-hmm.
then they're foolish.
So it'd be fun to go around and just whenever you see your child or a young person doing this to just say, hey, you fool, right? But we had to read those other verses as well about the kind words and, gentle tongue and things like that. So we have to be careful how we say it. But as a child or a younger person, it's as you're reading this, you're getting the idea that maybe listening to your elders is a good idea. Maybe there is some wisdom in the people who've got gray hair that it would be worth taking advantage of, so that you can learn from their mistakes. So it is a call. It's just they're just, again, these are just a few examples. And again, you see, this is how it really ought to be. The wise person, the wise young person is going to listen to their parents, listen to those who are further along. But the foolish young person is going to despise that admonition, who's going to say, I don't want to listen to you because, you're so old. It wasn't like this when you were young. Yeah, well, it probably was, but that's okay. It's kind of how it goes. But that's what the book of Proverbs is full of. There's 30 chapters in the book of Proverbs, actually 31. chapters in the book of Proverbs, and most of them are just like this. They're a little one-liner after one-liner. Sometimes they follow one after the other, but usually they're just random. They feel random. One's talking about your business practices. One's talking about how you treat others. One's talking about who you listen to. One's talking about how you speak to other people. One's talking about being diligent in your work. One's talking about having integrity or honesty. And they all go in different ways, but they begin to paint a picture of this is what it means to live a life of wisdom. What Fee and Stewart would say is this is how one makes godly choices in their life. Because that's what Fee and Stewart say. That is the goal of this wisdom that Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes are trying to lead us to. So that's what those books are kind of all about. So as you watch the videos this week, as you begin to wrestle with some, we're asking you to read a few of those chapters, like 10 through 15. You don't have to read them too closely, but read. In fact, I'm going to suggest that you read from a different version. Maybe find one that you like that's not this NOAB, and read it in a way that, in a version that speaks more to you. If you tend to read out of the new, say the New International Version or the Today's English Version or the Living Bible, you know, whatever your version of choice is, maybe try a little different version when you read the book of Proverbs, and just see how they speak to you, because they may speak in a way that really makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that'll be some of your reading assignment is going to be a few of those. So read them, but I'm encouraging you to take a different version as you go. Okay, then other than that, let's go. I want to touch just briefly on our Moodle this week and see if there's any questions as we move forward into it. Oh, there it is. Couldn't find it. Now I got it.
Are we doing a PowerPoint in every one of these modules? Do you know?
No, not. But we did have a second one this week, and yeah, that was in week 2, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The Google slide project in 2, and yeah, there's a PowerPoint slide here in 3 as well.
Or are we partnering up again, or are we doing this one on our own?
Which one is that, Dawn? Which one is that in 3?
Isaiah. I think
it's 3.4.
3.4. Yeah.
3.4. You have 3.4?
In the syllabus, but it's not on Moodle.
Right, right. Okay, so we're not doing that one. Yeah, thank you. I took that one out. I didn't want to deal with that this week.
Okay.
So you don't have a 3.4. Thank you. I was getting a little nervous. And wait a minute, I'm looking at my Moodle. I don't see it.
Me too, because it didn't match up. The Moodle didn't match up to what I saw in the PowerPoint. So that's why I was like,
yeah. Again, part of that, how do I put this? The basic one, the basic Moodle gave us a thing on Amos, which I figured we would talk about Amos tonight in class. And the Isaiah, which I thought was not especially helpful, so I pulled those both out. That's why you don't have a 3.4 on the Moodle, okay? So let me go to share screen. Let me go to my Moodle. Here we go. So so this week we had that first video, again, dealing with the prophets, and then the assignment there on the role of the prophets. Then the forum in the second video, forum, and then a little bit of not Amos again, but comparing the prophets. And then we jump over a few, we jump over prophets, we jump over Isaiah, but then deal with our biblical wisdom. And we have 3.5, which is looking a little bit at Grassi as well as Fee and Stewart about how they understand wisdom in the wisdom literature. And then watching a short video on wisdom in communities, and that'd be 3.6. So actually this week is not a real heavy week as far as that, but some of the videos are longer, as you noticed in the early one, that one that was like 45 minutes long. most of the rest of the videos are all very short, less than 10 minutes. So it should be not a real heavy week. But again, the reading part is our critical piece here. So any questions about those 5 or 6 assignments?
You said that you took out the Isaiah PowerPoint, right?
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for asking. I just pulled that and I swapped one out that fit in the same category. But again, it just made it a little bit easier and not so much. So yeah, no PowerPoint this week. Thank you for asking.
Professor Motz,
Huh?
I was wondering, what's the best way to contact you? I sent you an email on Sunday, and I never received anything back. So I was.
Okay, that is the best way, Robin, and my apologies. I try to watch that and I've been looking at it and I did not see it. So I must have gotten kind of lost in the pile and I'll double check on that. Thank you for asking.
Okay.
I will look at it as soon as class is over. I'm sorry, I have looked at my email for a while. I didn't see it. I get a lot of stuff. It's not all about my class. It's other things with the university, and sometimes it gets to be a little bit of a avalanche, and so, but that is the best way. Or get a hold of Terry. Terry's got special access.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robin.
Okay.
Good. Okay, yeah, Terry.
I don't know if you've looked at a lot of our stuff, but how does it look like we're doing everything okay?
Yeah, you guys are really doing well. So, and I haven't posted a lot of grades yet. I've been really working on looking at just to make sure that we're on the right track, and we seem to be, as all of you probably did. I just got done with a class a couple weeks ago, and so I've been really working on posting final grades and signature assignments, and so I've been really a little slow getting back to your first weeks of assignments. You're not seeing grades in your grade book yet, but it's looking good so far. So stay on top of it. That's the key thing to this class, is not to get behind, because I usually am pretty graceful about allowing you to have a little extra time to get assignments in. But the longer you wait, you begin to lose points on that, and worse, it begins to feel like an avalanche to you too, and you don't want that. So so continue to stay up on it and stay on your assignments. You're doing really, really well on the whole. Okay, real good. Okay, well, thank you again. And Robin, I'll take a look at that email, and I will, if I have a response that makes sense, I'll shoot it right back at you. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week.
All right. Have a good week.
All right, thank you very much. Yep.
Bye, guys.
Mm.
Bye.
Bye.